Welcome back to Integral Podcast. And today I have another author who is going to talk to us about a book that he co-authored with another chap called Ben Ford. Darrell Mann wrote a book called Everythink. And it just caught my attention on Twitter as the description on the book says, a Gravesian approach to getting more out of yourself and your relationships with others. Like, that's just music to my ears. So without further ado, Darrell, please tell us, who are you?
Hey, Jason, thanks for the opportunity. So yeah, I'm great to be here. So who am I? I like to think of myself as something of a Renaissance man these days, in that we dabble in a whole bunch of things. And I think that happens because, first and foremost, the job we do with our clients, so we're a small consulting company, is all in the innovation space. So we're about helping companies to change, either developing new products or understanding customers better, or changing the culture inside an organization. So it fundamentally all starts from change, and quickly then goes into the idea of step change and transformation inside organizations. So the dabbling part means that when I started my career, I was an engineer. So I started my career in the aerospace industry, designing jet engines, and then started to realize that very often the engineering work we were doing was working on the wrong problem. And that's because the marketing people hadn't understood the customers. And so it became a case of, okay, we need to go and understand what the marketing people do and understand where things go wrong and how do we get that side of the innovation story right. And we did that we spent a number of years doing that. So that's when I first came across the work of Claire Graves. And then more recently, it was still difficult to innovate with organizations. And the realization was that we can find the right problem, we can generate the right solutions, but you've still got to do all the difficult execution stuff, which means you've got to embrace the brains of people inside the organization and get them to do stuff that they don't necessarily want to do. And so it became a capability issue inside organizations and getting the best out of people, and understanding the psychology of change, if you like. So I effectively became a psychologist at that point. And finally, I think we've managed to have enough pieces in the jigsaw to be able to go into an organization and meaningfully help them to change successfully. I mean, most change programs fail, and the vast majority of innovation projects fail. And we've been trying to decode, if you like, the DNA of the successful projects, which in innovation world, it means 2% of the projects that start are going to end up with some added value at the end of them.
So Claire Graves's PhD thesis, I believe, or an essay that he wrote, "Humanity Prepares for Momentous Leap," is something that I decided about 15 years ago. I'm not going to print things at home because I just realized there's not really need for it. But that particular essay, I made an exception to, because I printed it just to kind of feel it. Because there was so much emotion and feeling, and every time I read it, brings a tear to my eye, which is something that also Don Beck described why he got into that whole process of working on spiral dynamics. And so tell me, why did you take that great work and decide to upgrade it further? How did that come about?
Yeah, we've got a constant search. I mean, a big part of our rationale is someone somewhere solved your problem. So when you start to see organizations struggling with understanding the psychology of customers, that was the start of our journey into the Gravesian world. Then our beginning hypothesis was someone out there has done some hard, because it was on discontinuous change. Then we fairly quickly tapped into, it's probably the same essay that you're referring to of Graves, because even though I don't think he was familiar with discontinuous change in the way that we were, it was about discontinuous change, in that people's, their values change discontinuously over life, depending on the problems that they encounter and whether they solve those problems or not. And so it made implicit sense to us. And I was intrigued enough to go on one of the certification programs that was out there, and it felt like, there's some really good stuff here, but it's, what do I do with it? Because I think, because the job that we do with our clients, it's great to theorize about things, but ultimately, what am I going to do with it? How is this going to impact on the way that we think about customers, for example, and the way we think about people inside the organization, ultimately? And that seemed to be the first missing step, if you like, in the process. So it's great to be aware of these different value systems that exist in the world, and I love the idea of there's the spiral that goes with that. And I think in some respects, almost from day one, when we were working with clients, you could see that what Graves had done is had given people a language for something that we kind of implicitly knew. And so awareness is half the solution very often. If we understand the way the customer's thinking, where they are on this value system progression, if you like, then you've got a better chance of being able to design something for them that they're going to empathize with and going to accept. So it was, I think, born of what's missing from this world is, number one, once you understand the theory, how do I apply it? Yeah, and we've been talking about Graves's work with our clients for the past 15, 16 years. And I would say it always gets a great reception. And I'd say also that a significant proportion of people come up to me at the end of workshops or lectures or whatever it is we're doing, and they say, well, how do I go and find out more about this now? And for a long while, I look at the books that are available, and Graves's work is almost impenetrable. I mean, that's what happens when something gets written up after the event. And the Spiral Dynamics book is it's full of contradictions, I think, and it's pretty tough to ask people to pick up either of those books and know that they're going to stick with it. So the original conception of Everythink was, when people ask for where do I go and find out more, it's the place that I felt happy sending them to find out more about the theory. And then, as I say, very quickly that then turned into, okay, well, what does finding out more about it actually mean? And for us, it meant, can I apply this? What am I going to do with it once I'm aware of it? And how is it going to change the way that I think about customers and change the way I think about people in the team that I'm working with? So hence the relationships part of the title.
So I'll give a little sort of anecdote here. What happened to me on one of the corporate projects is there's two books that really stick in my practice that I used practically, and some of the books are like very referential, and you can use it like day to day and really kind of remind it. So because when they kind of full of good knowledge, that theory that can be applied to practice. We can't always like apply the whole book to every single project. Right. You can go back to bits and go, oh, that's how they did that. Then that's how they're proposing we do that. And so the two books that come to mind is Communicating Design by Dan Brown, and another book called Persona Lifecycle. I can't remember the author's names, but that's quite thick and really kind of juicy book. And so I once took that book into a client workshop, okay, because the job at hand was to actually, for me to work out who their personas were, who their like target audience were. Right. And I took the book because I wanted to use it as a sort of a bit of a reference point, right? And then after the workshop, I got told off because they said the client interpreted that you didn't know what you were talking about because you brought the book in. And I was like, it's quite the opposite because I do know, right? So the question is really, is Everythink book designed to be like a reference book, an inspirational book, a kind of methodological book? What kind of book is it? Tell us more.
I think, first and foremost, I would say it's a reference book because that's the world we tend to live in. And so, I think it's the 12th book that I've done. Most of the other ones are very definitely reference books where, when we go and teach workshops, for example, we work with clients on a project, it's likely to be a chapter in the book that's going to be useful to that project. So there's an element of that, I think, in Everythink. It's a reference book, but it's very much, I would say, a book that's is about application of Graves' thinking. And so if I've got a problem with a relationship, for example, with a team member or with a spouse or a friend or whatever it is, then there's a chapter about, okay, this is what happens in relationships, and this is how Graves' work can help us to unravel the problems that exist. So a big part of that for us becomes, wherever you've got a contradiction, where one person believes one thing, another person believes something else, what do you do in that situation? And all the time, how do I make progress from it? So that's really, I would say, it's raison d'etre. I'm in a situation, a person's in a situation, and here's the relevant chapter that's going to help you to make progress from that situation. On the reference side, one of my early frustrations with the Graves world, and particularly reading the Spiral Dynamics book, the Beck and Cowan book, was the numbers don't add up. So what percentage of people are thinking this value system, and then this one, and then this one, and one of the things that has meant the book's found a really long gestation period. I mean, we first conceived the need for the book about 12 years ago, but we knew we also needed some software tools to be able to go and scrape social media data, for example, make sense of that social media data, and be able to identify which value system a person is thinking. And so you can take a Donald Trump interview, for example, one that's not written for him, one that he's, when he goes off piss himself, what value system is he thinking from? And so we spent, probably 6-7 years building and testing those software tools. But once we'd got them working and we got them validated, and big thanks to clients that we've worked with that have allowed us to use their data for doing that, because I think lots of organizations have got masses of unstructured narrative laying around that the software tools we build have been really useful for. So for the first time, we've been able to look at massive chunks of social media in different countries, for example, run this Gravesian filter over it, and get a profile of a country or of a company. This is how many people are thinking in each of the value systems. And so I hope that's a contribution to the art, because in the Spiral Dynamics book, as I say, the numbers don't add up, first of all, which is a big frustration. And what we now know is that they're, in some regards, they're also quite significantly wrong relative to where the world actually is.
So weirdly enough, my next question was around software tools for analyzing where a person is at. So I'm a software engineer. I started writing programs when I was 9, and then studied software engineering formally, and still do that today. So one of the kind of like little side projects I had was basically a working name for it is integral text editor, which is the idea is to highlight the words that kind of imply which stage the person is thinking from, or sort of pitching from, or is talking from. And so I've then been wondering, like, is there a place somewhere, and how do I actually determine which word belongs to which stage? That's kind of like a sort of musing that I've been having. But I'd love to know more around how you're approaching this deterministic process.
Yeah, we need a side conversation about that, because I could talk forever about it. It's so we've reached a point where we've spun it out as a separate company, actually, which is it's called Pansensic. And the idea behind the company is that there is lots of unstructured narrative lying around in email traffic, in social media feeds, et cetera, et cetera. And we knew that in order to make sense of that unstructured narrative, there are various ways of doing it, but very importantly, in fact, one of the first tools we built was a Gravesian tool that allows us to look at a chunk of unstructured narrative. So a classic example would be an application letter, for example, from an employee, where you've got some story-like text, sentences. And so the way the software works is first of all, there is a keyword set. So the long painful part of the journey has been how do you identify words or phrases that are indicative of the DQ system, for example, the ER value system. So it took us, I'd say, 4 or 5 years before we got a credible bucket of those keywords. So that's the first part of the software. The second part then is a semantic engine, because what you've now got to do is to do a contextual relevance check of those words. So that, a classic example would be if somebody uses the word cross, that could mean that they're angry, but it could mean that they're going to King's Cross, or it could mean that they wear a cross around their neck. And unless you've got that semantic engine, you can't distinguish which meaning it is. So all of the text goes through that semantic engine. So you use the keywords first of all to identify potentially relevant stuff. You then go through the semantic filter, and then once you've done that, then you've got a pretty good indication that it's a word or a phrase relevant to the particular value system that is being used in the context of that value system.
Yeah, language.
Yeah, it's in many ways that the holy grail of the artificial intelligence world is interpreting what people are saying, and Pansensic as a whole looks at the world through lots of different lenses, we call them, of which the Gravesian one is one of those lenses. And very often you need to look through multiple lenses in order to make sense of what a person is actually saying. What people say and what they actually mean are not the same thing. I think that's something that the fast-moving consumer goods world knows intimately. You'll interview the customer in panels, etc. You build what they've just told you they want, and then nobody buys it.
Yeah,
because of that say-do gap. And what Pansensic is all about is reading between the lines. And I say very early on, we discovered that if you understand the value system that a person's talking from, then that gives you a pretty good indication of how much meaning to draw from what they've then said.
So coming back to the book then, Everythink, like, let's say, I just kind of use myself a lot as an example. Someone like myself, I'm always doing some sort of design, whether I'm designing software tools or systems, or even some visual designs or little games, card games, all that kind of stuff. And I'm constantly thinking about transformation and utilizing design to impact, like our company's strapline and mission statement is redesigning humanity, right? So it's like we're always on that trip, right? Redesigning humanity. And nowadays with internet, you never really know. You could put out a book like this, it could go super viral and literally impact the entire population. Similar with software, similar with all sorts of different things, even, these kind of podcast recordings and so on. So for someone like myself, I am who I am, and I am that I am. And, how is Everythink book going to help me do my redesigning humanity better?
Wow, there's a big one. I think, and when we talk about the Everythink content in workshops with clients, then there's a fairly standard exercise I do with people that says, let's take the new product that you're about to launch onto the market, and let's think about the language you're going to use to encourage people to buy what you've just done. So let's go through the different value systems. So let's look at the DQ, the blue person, for example. These are the sorts of things that DQ likes and what they don't like. And if you know that about a DQ person, okay, now tell me what sort of message are you going to give to that person to convince them to adopt your new product? And then let's do that again for the orange, the ER person. What sort of words, based on what they like and what they don't like, what should you be saying to them to convince them to do what you'd like them to do? We usually start with those two groups because they, just percentage-wise of the population, they're the two biggest groups. But just from looking at those two groups, what you can very quickly get groups to recognise is that what the blue person wants to hear is not the same as what the orange person wants to hear. So the first thing that the book tries to do is to say, look, this is what the blue person likes to hear. This is what they don't like to hear, and we've done that for all of the different levels of the value system. Once you've then got people to realise that, well, I need a different message for the blue person compared to the orange person, for example, then you've now got a choice. Choice number one is to say, okay, well, I need to communicate with those two people separately in order to give clarity to both groups. Or more importantly, from an innovation perspective, what I now need to do is to identify a higher level message that is going to resonate with both people. And so a big part of the transformation story for us becomes identify the contradictions. So when person A expects and wants to hear something different from person B, then the real innovator's challenge is to try and find message C, which resonates with both of them. So for example, in the innovation world, when we're dealing with the DQ, that blue person, we know we've got an immediate challenge because what they don't like to hear are words related to change. What blue loves is stability. So what that immediately then tells me as the innovator is don't use expressions like breakthrough or step change or transformation, because all I'm doing is making that DQ person very, very uncomfortable. What DQ likes to hear is stability and rewards and medals, and there's a right way of doing things. There's no ambiguity in life. So if I want to get that person to adopt my innovation, if I want to get them to change, first of all, don't use the change words, but do use the words that talk about increasing stability. We're going to do this to improve the stability, and if you're on board, then I'm going to make you a hero at the end of this. So the biggest reference section of everything is basically, this is what the different value systems like and what they don't like. And if you know that, then you've got a better chance of designing something and creating something that's going to resonate with their view of the world.
So now that we're living literally in the lockdown and all this kind of stuff, post-pandemic world, my master's degree thesis was managing virtual teams in completely virtual environments back in 2002. So I've been proponent of working virtually for about 20 years now. And, now we're in this digital world by sort of force, not by choice as much, but, it seems like a lot of people are liking to work from home. Right. They kind of got used to their sort of mess at home and practice working and living together. And so what immediately springs to mind is that this kind of book sounds like it's also got a bunch of methodologies to it that are integral part of the book. I'm sort of like asking a leading question here. So I'd love to know more about the sort of methodologies, but also the other part of the question is, does the book come with software in some sense? Is it a natural thing for the readers of the book to then actually also use some of the software that you guys have?
With all of our stuff, everything we do is in the innovation world, and the idea of the books is to put together a coherent story, a coherent and standalone story. So I always hate to come across as a software salesperson. Software tools have got a place in life. So the book, each chapter in the book is effectively a tool or a method that enables to allow a person to say, okay, well, this is my situation right now. I need to write some advertising messaging, for example. Okay, well, here's the chapter that's going to show you how to do that. I've got a conflict with an employee, for example. Okay, well, here's the chapter that's going to help you to make sense of what's going on in that situation. And a big part of what goes there is the contradiction solving. Innovation is about not making trade-offs. It's not live yet, but one of the things that we're going to put on the website shortly is a little version of that software tool I was describing earlier, which says, if I can input some narrative for a person. So what's going to go on the website is a person can take some unstructured narrative So take an email, for example, paste the text into the box in the software, and it will give you an analysis of the value systems of value system spectrum, I should probably say, of that person, or that, whatever that text is. So the way we tend to use that inside the company is, if I'm going to talk to a client or prospective client for the first time, it's useful information for me to know what their value system is. So if I can take some of their narrative, if I can find a speech that they're given somewhere, take that narrative and put it into the software, then it can give me a pretty good indication of, okay, well, that's an ER orange person, and so therefore when you are talking to them, this is what ER likes to hear and this is what they don't like to hear. So there's an element of the software's there as a support, so that when that web page is up live, that'll be a free tool just to hopefully intrigue people to recognize that this stuff is measurable, without the long questionnaire that are available to measure these things. Having said that, there's also at the beginning of a book a questionnaire, or it's actually not a questionnaire. We've hopefully found a novel way of very quickly identifying a person's value system. So one of the ideas we had very early on for the book was we need to innovate the questionnaire, because people hate filling questionnaires in for the most part. So how can I very quickly and accurately get a perspective on somebody's value system? And part of the reason for wanting to do that at the beginning of the book was context is everything with these things. And so we knew that if we apply the thinking to the book itself, there's no way I can write one introduction chapter, because a DQ person is going to read that introduction chapter very differently from a yellow GT person, for example. So the sequence at the beginning of the book says, okay, answer these questions here, and then depending on what your answer is, go and read chapter 3. You need the introduction in chapter 5, so that hopefully you've guided people towards an introduction to the book which is consistent with their view of the world.
That is so fantastic. I'm like, that is fantastic. I think I'm revealing here that I'm like a mega nerd. Like I don't think somebody should find this so like exciting, but I do, because it's like I've actually done like an hour-long live streams which I've called don't read books. I don't read books. I put them into practice. If it's not a book that I'm going to put into practice, I don't want to read it. It's just like a bunch of thoughts in my head that's just polluting, swimming around, And so what you're doing there is you're saying, well, look, you're not looking really to read a book. You're looking to make a change. You're looking to redesign humanity, whatever change, but create more stability, right? For people that work in a company. And so like, just go to the bit that resonates with you straight away, and then discover the rest of the book. But the book shouldn't necessarily be read in a linear fashion. And I think it's a great example of you as a sort of software engineer, hacking that process a bit and saying like, now go to chapter 3. That's exciting. And so I think when I first came across you on Twitter, and it's like, I find like Twitter is quite a toxic place nowadays. I remember like at the beginning, it was so beautiful. I was like, what did they call that? They use the phrase of ambient intimacy. Okay,
nice.
That was like, you felt that you had an intimate conversation, yet it was in public. And now it's like ambient toxicity. I tweet something and then suddenly there's like 4 people going, but then it's still, I'm on there because I come across people like yourself that I already feel like this stuff is like changing my life, because I'm literally telling you, we have been looking for something like this for just about coming up to 4 years now.
Right.
And it's really fantastic to hear that you're doing this in a scientific way, in a measured way, in a quantified way. And of course, these things are not black and white. They're not every one of our percentages is correct to 0.01 degrees, whatever. It's more like a fresh, correct outlook and evolutionary nature of all of this. That spiral dynamics book that was written a bunch of decades ago, of course, is going to be outdated compared to today, right? And your data set that you would have run 5 years ago is going to be outdated to today, but if you can rerun it, then you keep it more
absolutely.
fresh. And
and one of the things we tried to do in the book, I mean, the reason I think I first said, Graves is onto something here, he's understood the world from a first principles level, was the recognition that things are dynamic. So one of the metaphors we use in the book is mental gears. So I can change my mental gear depending on my context. But one of the examples we put in the book, now we've got the software tools, what we were able to do is to go back. So one of I think the best examples in the book is we looked at the United States and we looked at media for the last 40 years. So you run the analysis year on year, and you can see year on year how the value systems have changed in the United States. So in the Reagan years, very, very ER dominated. But then as 9/11 happened, as George Bush came along, with you with us or you're against us, and now Trump came along, how the blue has come back again. And so you can see this graph changing from year to year in terms of how the value systems of the country are changing. So you're absolutely right. I'm pretty certain that we'll be updating the book periodically to see how different parts of the world have changed, and particularly at the moment because the world's in one of these chaotic transition periods where things can go horribly wrong if we're not careful, or if the world changes well, if we transform in the right way, we can end up in a better place than where we are right now. So it's a very turbulent period, and as an innovator, it's great to be part of it. And I think what Graves' work does is it helps us to understand what's happening. So this toxicity on Twitter you're talking about is, for me, very largely explained by people with different value systems who increasingly can't talk to each other. So you get these echo chambers, which are ER echo chambers and DQ echo chambers.
So it feels like perhaps Twitter was almost like a green at the beginning. It was quite sort of sensitive, really. Similar to like what certainly like Medium to me seems to be a green type platform. Quite sort of curated, careful, considered, sensitive, sort of not just kind of here are the facts, but more kind of like this is what it feels like. And at the beginning, Twitter was a bit like that, to me anyway. And then it kind of slowly regressed to sort of the winners, right? Like winners get it all, like it's a followers game, sort of orange. And then it was like blue, here's just some news and stuff. And now it's kind of regressed into that red of like, you're wrong. It's like, it's kind of like, even if I've got 1,000 followers or whatever, I can still be like the little kind of king of my 1,000 followership, it's sort of like, it feels bad that I'm not Trump level, followership. But Trump plays from the kind of orange into millions of reds and blues, so it's a crazy place. That would be my gut feel, what I see. But what you're saying here is that you can actually show that graphically.
We can. I mean, I think one of the things. I mean, we've got an emotion analytics tool as well, and one of the things you can see is that. I think a fairly standard human trait is bad news travels faster than good news. So where we're at right now is what we see on Twitter is bad news travels about 7 times faster than good news does. So it's very easy to get into a downward spiral. And then I think we're also seeing that, let's say, descent down the spiral of, I agree with you, I think it was a much more green place when it first started. And the echo chambers that we see now are very blue and devolving further down to the CP red which is it's all about me, and people are losing the ability to disagree with others. And it's particularly frustrating for us because for us from an innovation perspective, a big part of the innovation story is being able to solve the contradictions. So the disagreement is actually where the gold dust is from an innovation perspective. If you can solve that disagreement, you make everybody happy.
Creative disagreement, not personal
Exactly.
disagreement. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
And okay, so when I was working with Amex Innovation Labs, we ended up pulling in the guys from Information is Beautiful book,
Nice. Yeah,
and the team there,
yeah.
and then we were doing some infographics with them for Amex dashboards and so on. Like, I'm just kind of making this remark that it would be fantastic to be able to get some sort of API sort of feed from you guys, and then have a bunch of, like, we could do sort of a graphics hackathon to sort of show this, because in the integral circles, that I kind of listen into lots of podcasts and so on, the guys are still using these outdated
Right.
data, right? And they're thinking they're arguing from a scientific perspective, but it's like, science changes quite frequently, especially in this kind of social sciences realm, that, especially
Yeah,
stuff
absolutely.
that has been softwareized. I always kind of use that word, and probably it's not word in the dictionary, but you understand what I mean. Digitized, basically. And so we can rerun this data like daily, weekly, monthly, certainly.
Yeah.
So there's no point in like referencing back to 20, 30 years ago, however correct that was, because it's no longer correct.
Yeah.
And it's incorrect scientifically to
Yeah.
be referring back to data that's outdated, unless it's in a timeline where you could say, well, back then it was like this and so on. And so many people have said to me that when I say to them, like, I love spiral dynamics and, applications of it, because I've been designing, for example, products and services saying we want to appeal to every stage,
Yeah.
and having more of an integral design which appeals to every stage that each person has. No matter what level you're at, you would have the previous stages integrated to some
Yeah.
extent.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so but people would say to me, no, spiral dynamics doesn't work. It's been proven that it doesn't work in places like Africa and third world countries, because they've skipped over to, for example, they'd say they skipped over to mobile phones first. They never had like a handheld telephone. It's like, that's not an argument to say the spiral dynamics doesn't work. So like, give us an example, like where you have successfully applied your book and toolkit and all this kind of stuff. Like, give us a success story here.
Yeah, I mean, we've put a bunch of those success stories and case studies into the book, just to hopefully make things live for people. But a lot of the stuff we do these days is very much, I would say, about culture change. So I'm very fortunate I get to work with leadership teams inside organizations. And the usual start point for us is I want an innovation culture inside my company. And so very early on for us, we're going to make some kind of evaluation of, okay, what are the value systems inside the organization? And so we see a lot of blue, orange chief execs, for example, and that tends to pervade down the culture. So it's an orange CEO, then orange tends to become very visible inside the organization. But very often I get the ironical situation where you've got a very blue CEO saying they want an innovation culture, which the irony being, of course, that the blue loves stability and doesn't like change. And so with a lot of multinationals in India, for example, that is the scenario. You've got a very blue boss with a blue hierarchy below them. And once you've made those measurements, then so one of the organizations we work with a lot was GE, particularly their research center in Bangalore, where getting people to understand that, okay, it's a very blue environment we've got here, but it's a research environment. There's a fundamental contradiction between you're asking people to create new things at the same time as you've got an infrastructure which is all about stability, rules, etc. And so we worked with the chief executive of that centre for about 3 years, just trying to work on that contradiction, and reached the point where, if you look at GE today, about 2/3 of all of the R&D inside the company is now done in Bangalore. Yeah, because you know, we've got a culture there where you've given permission for people to try new things at the same time as recognizing that the culture of the underlying culture is still very DQ, very blue. And yeah, I was in the very strange position of doing innovation workshops in Bangalore, but also doing some with GE in Cincinnati. And you know, what's happened now is that when I'm in the Bangalore sessions, I'm working with a group of people where, you know, no matter how crazy the idea that comes up is, it's possible. Yeah. Whereas when I'm in the States and doing stuff with GE in the States, it's the exact opposite of that, because we've not been able to apply any of the Gravesian thinking there. So I'm in situations where you're working with usually greybeard engineers like me, where everything's impossible. Yeah, but yeah, I think where does the R&D project work go these days? The fact that it goes to Bangalore is testament to, if you understand the culture and you build processes around the culture and the value system of people, then you can do great things.
So I did a talk a year and a half ago or something like that, and it was called System of Systems for Designing Systems. And
Nice.
this seems to be like one of those scenarios where what you've got is a system that enables creating a system for innovation that then harnesses and sort of grows the environment in which innovation can naturally spring out of systemically. Yes. Without you kind of trying to design this end system here, and people who are running that system don't actually understand that it's the system that generates the systems, let's say a phone or whatever, that needs changing there. And you're this kind of like meta God that comes in and feeds in the kind of like Abrahamic guidelines that then kind of set this culture up, and that culture naturally creates innovation. And this is what like most people don't understand. Like I literally delivered this talk and people just went like they were confused. And I said to designers, like one of the first questions you could ask yourself about a product, and you probably never ask yourself, is what is this? What is like the being level question? What is this? Right? And then we're like, whoa, that's kind of bizarrely kind of breakthrough. But you know, it's like the tendency is just to go straight into what this product has, right? It's got a nib, it looks like this, and it's like you straight away, you bypassed all this goodness up here that really enables innovation to happen in a way that's unpredictable, which is what you really want. You don't want to create another pencil. You want to create something that's beyond pencil.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've learned from painful experience. I mean, ultimately we call the company systematic innovation because it is about that system of systems in many ways, and it's a recognition that every organization is different from every other one. So I've got no chance of being able to go to any organization with a standard way of doing things. I've got to understand the world from first principle level, such that I can create something that's going to work inside whatever context we're working with. So again, for us, the reason for homing in on the Gravesian stuff was that was a great way of understanding an organization before we go in there, in order to understand how are we going to help them best, and how we're going to design something that's going to work for them. So for the first time in 6 months, I'm physically going to a client next week in Denmark, but we've just got we've asked them to do the analysis before I get there, so I can understand who they are as people. They've given me their objectives, and the deck of slides that I will take there will be completely different to the deck of slides that I'll take to any other organization, because I'm trying to build it around, this is the way these people think and this is how they see the world.
So I'll give another kind of quick shout out here. It's a guy called Simon Robinson, and his wife Maria wrote a book called Customer Experiences with Soul. and he worked at BT, and I also worked with BT on the big transformation program there. And one of the experiences I had there was they rolled in these, because they were like, oh, we're interested in now enabling better virtual team working through better tooling, blah blah blah. And they brought in those like massive Microsoft screens that you could write on, right, and draw on. And of course, those screens ended up being mostly used for Skype calls, right? It's just like basically a Skype call with a gigantic participant. I'm thinking, man, that screen costs like 100 grand and you're just using it for Skype call. So I was there as a coach, coaching other coaches how to apply transformation, right? So it's like, again, system of systems, or designing systems. And so there I went in and I realized it's like blue as blue can get, right? It's the deep blue sea. And so I realized, oh, like they've got these like Microsoft screens. And basically I decided I'm not going to type any notes or anything like that in the meetings or in the sessions. I'm just going to purely sketch note absolutely everything. Like every day I went in and just kind of did sketch notes, either on my iPad, or as soon as I had access to that big Microsoft thing, I just sketch note on the Microsoft thing. And people start coming up to me and they're like, what are you doing there? What's that? And I start telling them through the sketch note, like, well, this is how the structure of the teams and BT is. And then these people pass these documents over to this. Like, wow, that's fantastic. Can we bring you into our team to sketch out their things? Like, yeah, absolutely. And I became this kind of sketch noting guy, right? And it was kind of quite fantastic. And I was thinking, why have I not been doing this all my life? But you kind of realize through just doing, it's like show, don't tell. I mean, so what else? What are you kind of spending most of your time on nowadays? What's your typical day like?
I'm very fortunate because we work with clients, you know, in just about every industry, and so it's a different day every day. So the company in Denmark next week is a software company. So they've just done an IPO and are on a hockey stick growth inside the organization. So how do we grow to the next stage? Working with a fast-moving consumer goods company in Ethiopia today. And tomorrow working with an agriculture company in Canada. So the constant theme is innovation. So you know, they're trying to change something, and usually by a 10x factor, you know, either culture or new product or process breakthrough. So
9x is just not good enough anymore.
Well, I think 10x is one of those memes that people have increasingly latched onto now, that you know that it's not optimization anymore. So I think a big part of our thinking with companies is that an optimization mindset and an innovation mindset are completely different things. With optimization, you're looking at single-digit % improvements, whereas with innovation, you're looking for step change. Which is transformational in your language, but I think people latch onto and understand that idea of 10x, because it forces you to think differently about a problem.
It kind of hooks into that exponential thinking. It's like an exponent.
It does, yeah. And it's, again, you've got to be careful about how you use the language there, because if you've got that blue room, you can very quickly make people uncomfortable. So I know with this Danish company already that it's a very orange organization, and so they are competitive. They are seeing the world as a hockey stick growth. So 10x language is exactly the sort of thing that I'll be using those kind of words when I'm with them.
Do you play hockey?
I don't.
So here's something, and I love these conversations because, like I said to you before we started recording, there's no questions that I thought up beforehand. It's just all kind of organically. So the thing that came to me organically is this: I'm originally from Yugoslavia, okay. And so I came to UK at the age of 14 in 1999 as a refugee. I couldn't speak English and so on. So for me, learning English has been a big kind of thing in terms of really understanding the British culture, the language, all these new nuances around this word can mean that and that, completely 3-4 different things in different contexts. And I'm still struggling with loads of different British, one-liners that just like, I'm not even sure that people down the road here really can explain why things are said that way. But the point is that like, it took me 8 years to actually consider Britain my home, because I came as a refugee and I always thought we are going to go back to what became Bosnia. I'm from Bosnia, and 3 years of war there and so on. And so, but after time, you just saw like Layla came in and she's the Wimbledon champion 2030 in tennis, female Wimbledon champion. And, so it's like we're living here, we've got children, they're going to school, we've got a house. Basically, I'm British. 25 years, I've succumbed to the Britishness thing. And so, but the point, I capitulated, I give up, I'm British. But I've also been saying that like Britain as a country, the only country in the world known as great, okay? The greatness of Britain has been somewhat dwindling. And I've been saying this for like 15 years at least. And it's kind of making me feel sad. Yeah. And so, but when I'm speaking to someone like yourself, then I'm not sad anymore. I'm excited now because I see someone like yourself and the work that you're doing as the actual great British innovation trend even, right? And like the real culture of British innovation and so on, that so many are struggling to find because they're looking for it at places that are sort of like cookie factories or car factories and so on. And it's like, that's not where you should be looking for British innovation. You should be looking with yourself at this kind of meta level. So just talk to me a little bit about British innovation.
It's a fascinating. Perhaps the first thing to say is that the vast majority of the work we do is outside this country, and so I think the UK's got a real problem at the moment with the whole innovation agenda. And I think it's, I almost get an allergic reaction in this to a lot of the companies that we get to talk to in this country. So there's like this belief that, well, British people are creative naturally. So I don't need a system. I don't need a meta way of looking at things. I'm just naturally creative. And my experience of the last 20 years, and we've worked in 60 different countries now, is there's almost no cultural difference in terms of creative ability. The only potential advantage that this country has had is a value of the eccentric, and I think that's kind of disappearing a little bit now. Everyone wants to kind of fit in, I think, and I think the toxicity of social media just reinforces that even more. But when I was growing up, music was my big thing, and I grew up at just the point when punk rock was happening, where there was this revolution. And it was about clearing out the old. It wasn't about talent. It was about doing things differently. And so I was fortunate. I came of age at one of these change points in history where it was okay to break the rules. When I went to the workplace, it was okay to break the rules. Rolls-Royce was thrown into the deep end. But I think globally there's a problem with innovation. Certainly in the West, there's a problem with innovation because I think increasingly leaders get to the top of an organization by being operationally excellent. They don't get there by being innovative. And so I think the reason I spend more and more time in Asia is because I hear it all the time from managers in India, China. We normally would expect to copy something that's been done in the West, but somehow the West isn't innovating anymore. So, maybe we can do it ourselves then. And I think what it comes down to is that when an organization has got a lot to lose, and a lot of Western organizations have got a lot to lose, it's very difficult to force yourself to innovate. That's the problem inside Apple at the moment. They've got an awful lot to lose. Tim Cook does not want to be the person that sinks the ship. Whereas if you're in India, you've got nothing to lose. So it's much easier to say, right, we're going to do an innovation, anything. right now. And I think very often that having nothing to lose is the spark you need at the beginning. And when we come along with a systematic process, in this country we tend to not get believed. I don't want a systematic way of doing things. In India and Korea especially, people perceive that they're not creative. Even though that I've not seen any difference at all, they perceive that they're not creative. And so they're at least willing to listen to, here's a systematic way of doing things. So it's quite frustrating as a British person, because I'm like you, it's, where's the great gone? And I hope it's one of those transitional things that says, change only happens in a crisis, and let's create a crisis. That's what we're in the middle of right now.
Yeah, and because again, this, it's like amazing how conversation with you just brings about like different little anecdotes. Because one time I was working with up in Watford with National Lottery, and we were taking the train back and bumped into this guy who was working for Mothercare, and he was designing. He's like a industrial product designer, designing push chairs and things like that. And he said like, and this was good sort of coming up to 15 years ago, okay? And that's where I kind of started sort of like a warning started going off in my head, right? It's like, oh gosh, like this country is effed, right? And so this kid said to us, we're like, how's it working for Mothercare? This is quite quirky, right? Weird, right? It was like a guy and so on. And he goes, well, yeah, I'm spending like months. They're asking me basically how to redesign a pushchair so that it costs less to produce it, but it's kind of the same thing, right? Yeah. And he goes, I spent 3-4 months, like breaking my head over these designs and so on. And then I send it over to China in the factory, right, to kind of, roll it off for like manufacturing. And they come back to me and they say, this can't be made. Like your design is impossible to make. Right? It's just simply physically impossible. And then he would say, oh shit, like what can I do? Right. And the designer, a Chinese guy who would be sitting in the factory, it's like a sort of in-house designer, just kind of like in the corner. And imagine this like in the corner sitting there quietly. He would take this British guy's design and spend an evening on it, turn it around and send it back to him. And the guy would look at it and go, oh my God, that's what I've been wanting to design. But this guy just can twist it around. It goes, and we could just put it into the factory now and run 1 million copies of this, and it'd be perfectly, and it would be like half price to manufacture, but looking better, it's contemporary, all that kind of stuff. And I was like, this country is effed, right? 15 years ago when I heard that. And so, it's
a scary thing. I think we see it with a lot of organizations where they've outsourced manufacture to a cheaper part of the world, and as soon as you separate the designer from the manufacturer, you've created an enormous problem there. I used to, when I was designing at Rolls-Royce, the factory was 100 yards away. You could go in and talk to the person who was manufacturing and have a discussion with them. But today, when it's 1,000 miles away from the manufacturer, you've lost that. And it's scary, but hopefully you've got to go through the crisis to transform the world to the new world.
Well, Darrell, look, it's been fantastic to speak to you. It's very rare for me to feel like I've learned something new, and I'm so glad we had this conversation. Perhaps there is a part 2 and 3 to this as well, down the road. But please tell the listeners, where they can, what they should go to after this, so we can link it to the right resource, where they can find the book or your services or something.
Yeah, well, thanks for the opportunity, and I've really enjoyed the conversation as well. So, so I think your strategy of let's just let it flow organically was a very good one. So the website is systematic-innovation.com, and people can find everything from there. So that's that's all the stuff that we do. For the Everythink book specifically, then on the homepage you'll see a tab called products, and if you go into that tab, then you'll get to our shop, and you'll find the Everythink book. There. In fact, I think we've got a feature on the homepage at the moment with the cover of the book shown, so people should just be able to click on that link and get straight to the book.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And, it's fantastic. You're just like, you actually rock, man. Seriously, I mean this. You know, that's like white-haired man, yes, but you rock, man.
We should have a follow-up conversation. I'd love to talk to you. Jason, thanks so
Awesome.
much for the opportunity.
Take care. All the best. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.